I find myself in like my early 20s waiting tables, and I'm looking around, and obviously no disrespect to anybody that works in the restaurant industry, but like you could see like 2 decades could pass by like a blink of the eye, and I'd still be waiting tables. It's the misnomer that entrepreneurs are risk takers, right? We're risk mitigators. You mitigate the risk so much then you have to take the leap, right? And that's what I think the creativity in entrepreneurship comes from risk mitigation. And I always think intuitively, I always had a good sense of arbitrages and optionality. This is why I can't stand this industry we're in, these podcasts we're in. It's like, it's this Gell-Mann amnesia, this Dunning-Kruger effect, where we think that like, just because somebody has money, that they know about everything. Everybody has these religions when it comes to investing, right? Like the value religion, the momentum religion. Everybody's got these religions and they never cross over. But if you're trying to truly build a diversified portfolio of different asset classes that, zig when the other zag, et cetera, is like, you have to be able to put those religions aside and combine things that can work at different times and different time horizons in ways that people will normally never do.
Welcome to The Intentional Investor with Matt Zeigler, where he and his guests explore the intersection of investing and life, portfolio and purpose. Nothing in this podcast is investment advice. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously, you should only act on investment advice from someone you know and who knows your unique situation. We are not that person. Matt Zeigler is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments, and the opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments or of Second Foundation Partners. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of Sunpoint Investments.
You're watching The Intentional Investor right here on Epsilon Theory YouTube. I'm your host, Matt Zeigler, and my guest this week, straight from the precursor to the Lyricist Lounge. Now, is that some salt and pepper in your hair? Or is it just the appearance of a permanent portfolio of unequal parts, salt, pepper, Spinderella, aka the only artist to be the first on the first and last episode of Yo MTV Raps? I want to know if you got them on your mixtapes. I know we're going to get there because I have so many questions about those tapes. And outside of cassette culture, I can't decide if he's the Kobe Jones or the Claudia Reyna or the Tab Ramos of finance. Now I know I've determined he's not the Alexi Lawless of finance because he's definitely going to box on these vol curve options with the ability to play Route 1 on a counter, of course. Or maybe he's some modern Aladdin on a magic Persian carpet ride, stealing mystical lamps, Robin Williams' genie, not Homer, of course, and not for the in-movie versions of the songs because he's playing for the big hits. So if I'm keeping it a buck, and I know he's keeping it a buck, he respects Peebo Bryson and Regina Bell as much as the next 90s slow jam man could. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the Teenage Mutant Mutiny Ninja himself, the Captain Hook of the Pirates of Pinance. Oh, Captain, my Captain, the only cockroach you'd ever want to see in Napa, but that totally explains his move to Greater Philadelphia, Mr. Jason Buck. Welcome to the show.
Let's go. Let's go.
Let's go.
I've been so looking forward.
Drop the bomb on them. Drop the bomb on them.
So looking forward to this, and you exceeded. I didn't even want to tell you how much I was looking forward to the intro because I didn't want to put pressure on you. But you absolutely crushed it. I'm crying. I got to wipe my eyes. It is so good. It's ridiculous. But I have two things for you. Okay. Here's my guesses. Here's my guesses.
All right.
I think I know who the inspiration is for those intros. And I'm pretty sure none of your other guests have clocked it. All right.
Nobody's clocked. There's been a couple of comments of people pinching at the edges, but let's hear them. Let's hear what you got.
I really hope I got this. I believe it's Roger Bennett from Men in Blazers.
More than anything, yes.
Yeah.
And a mix of some other stuff, radio personalities and other things too. Yeah. But without question, years and years of consuming Men in Blazers and the Raj Bennett stuff, I was just like, let's have some fun. I can put my spin on this.
And you're crushing it. Yeah, it's got a little maybe Pat McAfee sprinkled in there, a little showmanship.
Absolutely.
Oh man,
showmanship.
It's a
little sway in the morning show. Little stretching Bobbito. We're calling from all the influences here.
Yeah, we're gonna go deep. Unfortunately, there's gonna be zero finance in this conversation at all. It's just gonna be all 90s hip hop references. But I want to compliment you for two things. One is obviously the intros are absolute bangers, and nobody's doing them quite like you're doing. But then the other thing, when I listen to these episodes, what I don't know how in real time too, you're taking such great notes and you recap so well. Your skill set is unparalleled in this space in finance podcasting. And then I'm also kind of pissed off though, honestly, because my thesis always was like, I always wanted to do a podcast with people in finance, and we talked about anything but finance, right? Because my thesis was that like you're getting some of the most intellectually curious, fascinating people in the world, and let's talk about anything but finance. But when I found when I tried to do it, is they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to expose themselves to not talking about finance. And so I applaud and commend you for getting people to not talk about finance and expose their soft underbellies of their childhoods and kind of sit back on the therapist couch with you.
Thank you. I'll let that all go to my head immediately
Exactly.
after we press stop afterwards. But I think this is really important because you hit on something right off the top here. Why do you think so many people, you've got a background in all sorts of stuff, and we're going to get into this, but there's so many people in finance that are just so much more interesting than like the day-to-day portfolio management or the tax planning or whatever else. You start to talk to them and it's just, I never would have dreamt, like as a 90s kid who wanted nothing to do with anything like a career path like this, how many cool people were going to get sucked into it? People like from all stretches of the humanities that would end up in this business. Like, why do you think that happens?
This is all going to be like, I just patted you on the back, now I'll pat myself on the back. This is just going to be pure solipsism. But like a part of it is like, I think there's two kind of things at work. One is a lot of, at least on like the hedge fund side and everything, it's usually people that, couldn't really work for anybody else. I actually say entrepreneurship is a bug, not a feature. It's only in the last decade or so that we've exalted entrepreneurships, but I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and you were just a loser before to be an entrepreneur. And it's quite frankly, you have poor brain chemistry. Like if you had good brain chemistry, you take a bi-monthly paycheck, right? So one, you're going to have some weirdos there in that space. Then I just, traffic in the deepest, darkest corners of the esoterica. And so I'm filled with weirdos in the long ball and commodity space because nobody's really there. So that's kind of self-selects. But then more importantly, I think when we talk about, like you said, how did we end up here, is like, I think in a way, portfolio construction is like the apogee of a liberal arts education, right? Like, because
Totally.
it's a bit of a centaur too. You have like this art and science to it, right? You have to be able to crunch all the data and have all the numbers, but then use your imagination to realize what's not in that data set. And so like those kind of things combine, I think, to make that, insatiable curiosity that maybe you have from a liberal arts education of like, how do you apply that to the real world and solve a practical problem of like, what do I do if I have savings left over? So maybe that's, but like I said, that's just, that's all just patting both of us on the backs. I think I'm going to break my arm here.
Well, there's something too about it. The whole, the entrepreneur as somebody who's fundamentally unemployable in some way.
Yeah.
And then there's this sick thing about the people who are fundamentally unemployable who aren't just looking for people to necessarily like employ to amass their own operations, do their own things. But then like we want to go out and invest in other people or partner with people. And this was, spoil this if you want to at all, like the whole Pirates of Finance thing, like that's a whole thing, like a bunch of entrepreneurs on a ship together who are out on the high seas, like trying to like get the bounty. There's a real spirit of that in the corners of this industry. And I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think there's, we have these unconventional names, right? With like Mutiny Funds or a cockroach fund, strategy is like, why do I do that? Well, one, I'm always fascinated by naming conventions, right? But the hard part is every name's taken. You think you have a great name, then you Google it's already taken. And then in finance, people have all of these, Greek mythology names and or like 3-letter acronyms. One, I can't remember the 3-letter acronyms, so there's no way I was doing that. And then, yes, I can do the Greek mythology and philosophy with the best of them, but I just felt it was a little maybe too pretentious for us. And, we come from outside the industry. So I was like, I had this idea for around Mutiny for a long time. And I was like, it's probably, actually our original working title was Ataraxia, which is ancient Greek philosophy for unperturbed by external events. And luckily, like, I was like, what are you doing? And then, but like the idea of mutiny, though, there's many reasons behind it. But one of them is like, yeah, we're the mutinous, entrepreneurs. We're the people that are really going for it. We're the people that are doing something different. Where there's just so much like kind of CYA sameness, like kind of across finance and investing these days, that we just played up that, we come from outside the space. And so we're not going to hide from that, and we're going to have a little fun with it. And to me, like, you can do that stuff at the end of the day. They're kind of, you got to be so good they can't ignore you, right? Like it's a little bit of you put a target on your back at the same time. So I don't know, I'm willing to take that pressure, I guess.
Well, here's the targets on our backs. We can pat those targets all the way home. All right, take me all the way back. I mean, you can tell me whatever you want about childhood. One of the big things I need to know about your childhood specifically is the attitude towards sports in your household as a kid. Because my understanding is pre-soccer, like you guys, well, I guess we grew up around the same generation. Like even watching soccer was not normal.
No. That's what I'm so jealous now that with the amount of soccer you can watch and basically you can watch any league in the world, right? Like so exciting.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we
Right.
have it now, but we didn't have it then. I mean, I remember I had all these like VHS tapes of like Premiership like highlights that I would just
The best goals, the best goals of the year tapes.
the best
I
ones
still
like
have some.
the hard men too, like Vinny Gascoigne and stuff like that. Like, do you remember those ones? Those were
Oh
great.
my God. Yeah.
Yeah, take you way back on those beautiful like baggy Umbro uniforms. Those are the good old days. So yeah, I just grew up in a fairly unconventional household in many respects. One of which is, a lot of people joke we were raised by like the Royal Tenenbaums, and so but via my mother, we had to you had to be like number one in your class in schoolwork, and then you had to be like number one on the athletic field, no matter what your domain was. And then through my father was really into unconventional sports. So he was a triathlete, a mountain climber, a sailboat racer, a scuba diving instructor. So it was like we, in our house, we grew up watching, the triathlons, the Tour de France, and, America's Cup. So we didn't really watch conventional sports. So it just turned out over time, we played pretty much every sport growing up. All of us did. But then my brother and sister are twins. They're only a year and a half younger than me. So we're all basically the same age in the same household. And so I ended up going on to play like Division I soccer. My sister was an All-American gymnast at Brown. My brother played on the number one hockey team in North America. He decided to not go play juniors, but he could have probably went that route and played at Boston College eventually. But so yeah, that was the chaos we were raised in. Is like you had to be number one in school and you had to be number one on the field.
Was dad just showing you like by example, like, hey, I'm into these weird other things? Or was he like taking you out scuba diving and sailboating and all the other things?
Yeah, he'd take you out and force you to do everything. But I mean, it was, there's so many, I'm trying to think of so many stories. Like he would even, he was windsurfing in like the 80s on our lake in rural Michigan. And so he would put me on the front as a toddler on the front of the windsurfing board. So I would go out windsurfing with him in the mornings.
With him?
Yeah,
Okay.
with him. And then before school, in high school, him and I would go, we'd go water skiing on the lake, at school, when September, October, before the lake got too cold. We'd water ski before class every day. He was always just, and then triathlon training, he was just always out running, biking. And so it's just part of it. We had actually a dog that would go running with him. The dog would do 12 to 15 miles a day with him. So it's just like, we were raised at a very odd household. And so my dad one of his side hustles was basically, he became an assistant scuba diving instructor for a scuba diving shop in rural Michigan. But then these guys would take their clients out to like Micronesia and all over the world on these scuba diving trips. So my dad would get the trip paid for because he was an assistant scuba diving instructor. And so when we were all like 13 years old, we were all PADI certified, like as soon as you could be and everything like that. And so the way, now that I've gotten older, I can reflect. The hard part about this is like, I kind of hate narratives is because, narratives, we just tell the highlights, we forget all the other parts and we make it sound like it was some sort of linear progression. But the way I kind of think about it is we were raised in this kind of very bipolar childhood in the sense that like my father was like this weird Buddhist, Zen Buddhist in rural Michigan into alternative sports and was like a dirty hippie. And then my mom was like this hardcore entrepreneurial, Catholic capitalist and, really into these other things. It's just like we got pulled so hard in both directions that like we kind of figured out our own path down the middle, hopefully.
So talk more about your mom then for a second. Like, what do you mean she was the Catholic capitalist?
So
if you want me to make a state joke now, I can make here comes the Popa. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So her family like grew up, one of those big Irish Catholic, like kind of rural families where like, they had, chickens and vegetables in their yard. They were organic farmers before organic became cool. It was organic because you were poor, right? In the 70s and 80s, right? And so they grew up, like 9 kids, like that typical kind of rural Michigan Irish Catholic household. And, she was just always, trying to make a buck. And so she was always an entrepreneur. She was a realtor for most of my life. Now she owns a movie theater in Napa Valley. And, she was always hustling. We grew up, I think I lived in 12 different houses by the time I was 18 because she was flipping houses before that came a thing. And so we were always living in construction zones and everything like that. And so my dad came from a more well-off family where my great-grandfather was an inventor that invented a lot of like machine tool stuff and had some companies. And it just so happened they went to the same high school. And so that's where they got together.
Where'd they meet? Where'd that relationship start? What school or what high school did that happen at? What part of the country?
So this is great. It's called Gull Lake High School. It's in rural Michigan, outside of Kalamazoo,
Okay.
Michigan. And the funny part, like my mom was like top 10 in her class, and my dad actually got kicked out of high school. And so they've always been polar opposites. And so my parents were very young when they had me. I think my dad was only like 19 when they had me. And so when I went to high school, ended up going to the same high school. And the first day of class, they'd always go like, Jason Buck. And I'd be like, yes. And they'd be like, wait, you're not related to Tracy Buck, are you? And I'd be like, yeah. So I had a lot of the same teachers that had kicked my dad out of school. And
Oh man.
they were just like,
Oh,
I was starting
man.
off on like a bad foot, like every time. But it's just
One
like,
thing to have a bad older sibling. It's
No,
another
yeah,
thing to
yeah,
have a
sure.
bad dad.
yeah, it's like, that's my father. I got all those genes in me. So yeah. But my
Oh
mom
my
was top
God.
10. Like, I think she was like number 3 in her class or something. So it's just, that's what I'm saying. They're both just kind of polar opposites.
And I mean, we're going to keep on filling in the nuance around your details here.
Yeah.
Just curious. So the twin brother and sister just behind you. So she goes gymnast, he goes hockey, but I'm assuming she's not a professional gymnast anymore. And we know he's not a professional hockey player. Where did they end up? Or are they like running hedge funds somewhere too?
No, when my brother, after he stopped playing hockey, I think he had like 5 of his teammates played in the NHL and everything like that. Is one of his best friends was Ryan Miller, the goalie that won like the Hobie Baker Award, played for the Sabres. So you probably might have heard of him. And then he decided when he wanted to go to college, he didn't want to. Typically in hockey, you go play juniors in Ontario for a few years and then you go to college. And he just wanted to go right away. So he ended up going to Boston College, got a degree in like biopsychology, which prepared him well to now own restaurants. So he owns a restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina. Shout out to Coterie. But he kind of worked his way through the Death and Co lineage in New York for craft cocktail bartending. And he ended up opening bars in New York for them, and even moved to Mumbai for 2 years and opened up like the best bar in Mumbai. And so he went down that path. My sister has always been the golden child, the high achiever. So she's pretty much stopped at every Ivy League school on her way to becoming a gynecological surgeon, actually a urogynecological surgeon. And yeah, she lives with her surgeon husband in Miami, and they met at University of Chicago. So so she's definitely the golden child. And yeah, that gymnastics career is always cut short. And I was always shocked. She's actually like 5'7", so she's always been very tall for a gymnast, but she was always one of the best gymnasts in the country. Like growing up, was, an All-American her freshman year at Brown, and just always crushed it.
And were all of you like, at least at the young age, because of probably especially because of dad's influence, you're also the generation where everybody plays 18 different sports to start, and then you slowly narrow in.
Yeah.
So how many sports did young Jason play?
Man, I try to think. I played ice hockey, soccer, basketball, tennis. I did water ski, snowboard. It just basically everything but like football and baseball. Like everything but like your traditional sports.
Yeah. And you hate steak and potatoes. And yeah. So you skip out on all those. Does that like, do you find yourself are you in an out group like from growing up because you're not in those main core things, especially that part of the country, not playing baseball and football? Are you aware of this at a young age, or are you just totally integrated because you're who you are?
Yeah, I wonder if like, I assume like, it maybe took me till I was a lot older in life before I realized maybe I am slightly different, but I don't want to assume I'm different from everybody, but I always felt like I was in an out group. Like I always just felt I was very different. The one good thing is like where I grew up, it was a very like soccer centric community. So like the football team sucked, but the soccer team was great. And a lot of these guys went on to like national careers and everything. So at least that was fairly normal. It was just like a lot of the other little things too. Is like I said, with a Zen Buddhist father and a Catholic mother, they let us choose our own adventure with the religion. And so that's one of the deep explorations I started at like 12, 13 years old. And so I was always kind of out of step there. Yeah, a lot of people think I'm just blatantly contrarian, but I think for the most part I go along to get along, but maybe because of that weird upbringing, I have some contrarian streaks to me.
Church as a kid? Like, was mom taking you to mass? Were you doing communion and all that stuff? Or was dad intervening and saying,
No.
You can do this much so long as we
They let us
do whatever else?
They let us do what they wanted. So my dad taught us meditation as far back as I can remember. And this is, like I said, this, as you know, it's very popular now, but in the early 80s in rural Michigan, not popular. And then we would go to church with my mom's family. And this was even at a time when they would do mass in Latin. So we were doing mass in Latin at the Catholic church with my grandparents, doing Buddhist meditation with my dad. But then when I started around 13, I would ask my parents, I'd go with friends to other churches, synagogues, everything. I just wanted to explore all of it. And we'll get into that, I'm sure. But like, that's what kind of led me down the path of exploring kind of comparative religions and just the global sense of either, traditional churches or mysticism, et cetera.
So we're definitely getting into all that. And we'll probably get to like you at age 19 by the end of this conversation is where I'm assuming. This piece, like, do you get good at, what's the first thing you get really good at it? Is soccer the emergent skill that all of a sudden you're like, this is an area of focus, or does something else happen first that you get really good at, that adults are like, whoa, Jason's good at this thing?
I was really good at hockey first. And so that was the one that really kind of blew my mind. That was the one where I was really winning all the awards and everything was in hockey. And then my brother's playing the same sport. So around 13, for whatever reason, if I can recall correctly, I switched to soccer. My brother stayed with hockey. But it was that was where I first started getting those accolades in hockey. And then we were all in like these like gifted education programs. Like I would go to like kind of like a separate classroom with like me and 2 other kids, and we had special teachers and all that stuff. So that was part of it all. But like I say all that with smiling, because then once puberty hit, I just went totally downhill, right? Like everything changed in my life. I went from like probably straight A's to like D's, like immediately. Like once I discovered girls and like all this other stuff, like everything changed from that aspect. But it was more like academics and athletics with hockey first. And then I started, I guess, selling stuff as an entrepreneur at school at like 12, 13. So I was always trying to, make a little hustle here. So that's the other part of that bipolar upbringing or tripartite upbringing is like, I always was like selling stuff, trying to get some freedom, make a little money, buy some candy.
So let's talk about finding a little scratch as a middle schooler and getting this together. We have this in common too, where there's just, what do you think? Like, was it just mom and dad saying like, I'm not giving you money for that, but if you have your own money, it's okay? Was it just the sense of independence that came with it? And then what was the first magic trick where you're like, oh, somebody gave me money for this stupid thing that cost me nothing?
Yeah, unfortunately, we learned too early that the money makes the world go round. But it's also one of the things I think about when I talk about entrepreneurship being a bug, not a feature. And it's very rare that I find anybody, even in our ages now, is like, tell me what you sold at like 12 or 13, right? And then I'll tell you if you're an entrepreneur or not. Like rarely does somebody like come to entrepreneurship late in life. It's usually these kids that were hustling something. And then like, what's the Yvon Chouinard quote, is something like, show me an entrepreneur and I'll show you like a juvenile delinquent. It's somebody says like, this sucks, I'll do my own thing. And so it was like, it was like that freedom, that juice it gave you, like just, and then it's just like, honestly, I think more than anything, it's like solving complex problems or just figuring out a solution. And so like one of the first ones I think was just making bracelets, right? Like braiding bracelets and selling those in school at like 10, 11. The one where you and I are going to get along all too well on is, creating, setting my alarm in rural Michigan to get up at 2:00 in the morning for Yo MTV Raps. I had a dual cassette tape player that I plugged into my TV, and I would wait for the commercial breaks to come off. And then when they jump into a video, I'd hit record. And so from like 1 to 2 a.m., I would record Yo MTV Raps. Then after putting all those together, then I'd burn them on the dual cassette. And then I would take cassettes to school and I'd flip them for like $5 a cassette when I was like 13, 14 years old. And so I was like the purveyor of rap in like Southwest Michigan growing up, because I don't think anybody else had heard of it at that point.
We'll be able to like trace all these weird things back to, were there any downstream effects that you were aware of? Did you inspire anybody to go off and do anything cool?
Oh God, that would be amazing if I had a story. I was like, yeah, this guy named Mike Posner or Big Sean?
Right.
No, I don't have any.
My tapes, they wouldn't.
Yeah, pull up the mixtape, like you owe me royalties now or something. No, not that I know of, but it's amazing. Have you heard the theory, the browning of America?
You talking about Stephen Stout, like the whole tanning of America, that whole thing?
Yeah, I think it's Stephen Stout, but like I think you got it from somebody else originally. But it was about like basically our generation grew up with like MTV, and then more importantly, Yo MTV Raps and BET, and then like other generation like kind of copied black music, but it was like for ours it was like front and center. But then even more so than like our heroes, our TV shows, our entrepreneurial like people we looked up to were all black. And so it was like, this was the first generation that they think almost led to like Obama's election, because it was like the browning or tanning of America, because it just became part of our daily lives to like aspire to be like, like black culture in general.
Yeah, it's really interesting to start to unpack the whole aspirational shift. That's probably a rabbit hole that we'll have to go down on a whole other route. So I don't have time for this, but
the hard part is too, is like, unfortunately when we were growing up, one of the biggest ones is from the both rap to entrepreneurial to producer scene was P. Diddy. So now I'm not sure how much you want to say, you looked up to P. Diddy as a teenager, right? But,
Yeah, but there's, I don't know, it's the cross currents of all these things. Like you have to unpack from like what we know now versus what we knew then, and what parts of the culture of all sorts of cultures that we are a part of and touched on. Because even that stuff's weird. I mean, I'm still, at some point I get around to it. I need to do a review of the Rick Rubin book that I love the Rick Rubin book, but I've noticed I've had a completely different experience from that book than most people who talk about that book, because they're like, I feel like all these people think he's like this like Zen philosopher.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Rick Rubin's whole tagline was like, I like the worst shit.
So
like he is the ultimate highbrow, lowbrow.
Yeah. So what's your general takeaway?
Well,
That's different.
a quick aside, only because you'll
please.
appreciate this. Like, do you know who he co-wrote that book with? The Creative Act? Like, do you know who the co-writer is? Basically the ghostwriter on the book. It's the guy who wrote The Pickup Artist. Like, it's like the
I didn't know that. Neil
like,
Strauss
trash thing.
Yeah.
And nothing against Neil Strauss or the career he's built or anything else. But like a key to understanding like how this book came to be is understanding that this is a guy who loves the worst shit. Like he wants extreme highbrow and lowbrow mixed together. And that's what makes it interesting. If we focus it just on the Zen philosopher side, we miss out on all that beautiful nuance. And that to me is the interesting thing here.
So other related question to that, do you have the audiobook version?
I actually ended up doing both because I was really curious about how
I
that
love
would
the
go.
audiobook.
Did you?
Like 'cause I just
It's
throw it on
amazing.
every once in a while, right? When I'm like, I need to kind of zen out and be a little meditative, is like just listening to Rick's voice is like the one thing I won't listen to on 2x speed, which by the way, I wish, like, it's so weird listening, like hearing your voice on 1x speed. But yeah, that's,
I know. I'm the
highly,
same with all that stuff. Yeah.
I highly recommend the audiobook for anybody, because you can just dip in and dip out, right? And then just Rick's voice is so good on the audiobook. And then his podcast is so aspirational to me in the sense that like you can just say 5 words and have a 3-hour podcast. That's awesome. I want to do that.
Him and the Rory Sutherland one.
Oh,
That's one
God.
that I've gone back to multiple times because
So
that
good.
one is just like, it's basically the walk where I can't stop taking my phone out to take notes, even on re-listens, which I can't understand.
Rory Sutherland is human catnip for entrepreneurs.
So what do you make of that? Like why, like that's also one where, I mean, since what, 2000, basically since the financial crisis, sometime around there was when the first one of his like YouTube speeches went viral. And I was just like, to your point, human catnip. Like I can't
Love
resist this.
Love it. Everything. I've read Alchemy like
Seth
4
Godin with a
times.
British
Yeah.
accent giving me twice the provocations. I love it. Crack.
Exactly. Everything you said, like, it must be right. He's got that British accent. So I think it's going to that entrepreneurial sake of like, you need a contrarian idea, right? You need to solve a blue ocean problem. And that's what Rory Sutherland's so good at thinking about. And then it maybe starts shifting your brain to see things like, or like it's an inversion in a way too, of like just looking at, things from a different point of view.
Last Rick Rubin thing, and then we're going back to, middle school mixtapes. Did you hear this Alfred Hitchcock interview thing that they posted on the Tetragrammaton, whatever that is? I don't know how they did it. It's been irking me for the last like week or two since it came out. It's really cool. I think they assembled like snippets of this Hitchcock interview with like him. So it's like he's asking the questions, but are you a Hitchcock person at all? Any fascination with that, or?
Somewhat. Like, I do like Hitchcock. Like, I wonder if they'd stitch it together like a notebook, like LM style. Is that kind of
That's
how they did?
I'm very curious if they used AI in some way, which almost would make it even more interesting to me. But it was really good. It's really worth your time. You want more catnip in your life.
Yeah,
Good
I tend to dip in and dip out of Tetragrammaton, and then
Likewise.
and Hitchcock too. I saw like pre-war German cinema. I love movies. And I've always liked Hitchcock. Never necessarily been my favorite, but
Okay, interesting. So old movies, you're a big movie nerd?
yeah, I mean, over my lifetime, I've probably watched thousands of movies and read thousands of books, and to me, they're pretty much equal in entertainment value. And one of my life goals one of these days is just to like somehow take 2 years off and just watch the Criterion Collection over like a 2-year
Oh my
period.
God, yeah.
And
Absolutely.
just get like a nice seaside, like, hotel room or something, and just 2 to 3
Every day.
movies a day, every day.
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
man can dream. Like, isn't it great? Like the quote the other day is like, I was like, getting older is just saying, if I can just get through the next 2 weeks, things will slow down. And that's just like that forever. And I just feel like it's all my life is anymore.
Yes. And then there's also those weird glimpses of where you see stuff. So now take me back in middle school and another segue before we get back to music. So movies at that age, were you a consumer of movies from that era?
Yeah, I'm trying to
No,
think.
and I'm not asking about movies from that era. I'm more curious in the question my wife always asks me, how the hell did you see this when you were like in middle school? Like who was giving you the Blockbuster card to go out and get
Oh
this
my
stuff?
God, that's so good. That's such a good thing. Well, one, I generally I hate the '80s for like movies, fashion, everything. Like I just think it's
Sure.
one of the worst
Fine.
generations of all time. Right? Speaking of Rick
Well,
Rubin, like high low brow, right? And I hate to do a broad paintbrush like that, but I was laughing because you ever seen The Brothers Bloom? Speaking of movie, like
yeah.
with Mark
A long
Ruffalo
time ago.
and
Yeah.
Adrian Brody, and
Right.
he's just
Yep.
like I hate to paint an entire country with a paintbrush, but Mexico's a horrible place. That was the thing we laughed just
Right.
trying to like
Right.
paintbrush. But so the movies was hard, right? Because like back then, right? Like how did you get that content? And so I would go to all like the local ones, but like where we live, we had to drive like 30 minutes even to get to a Blockbuster. And yeah, I was prime Blockbuster days and everything. But then I remember from like the Kalamazoo, Michigan area, you can take the train to Chicago or Detroit. And so
Hmm.
I would go to Chicago a lot as a kid or when we were younger. And I was just the art house films there, like, oh, art house theaters just blew my mind. Like that was one of the most exciting times of my life, to go to cities to see art house films. The other thing, our mom would take us into Chicago a lot to see like plays and musical theater. Like that was one of her other things is like, we also had to be educated in the arts. Like, so I'm saying we were raised by wolves and savages trying to like, I don't know what they're trying to do with us, but try to create, I don't know, Ubermensches or something. I don't know. And they, but we would go in to see plays and live theater all the time and stuff like that. So that's, that I guess like the art house film scene, I don't know when exactly what age or what film. I don't have like a real epiphany moment in that I can recall. But it's been something I've just been obsessed with, and I watch films every day. I just obsess over films and like every genre of film, except for like horror stuff like that. I don't really watch, but like I just nothing. I get totally lost in films, and all the time people get mad at me because I'm like, "Hey, have you seen this?" And they're like, "I watched it with you," and I'm like, "Yeah, I totally like, I zone out, like willing suspension of disbelief. I'm fully immersed. I have no idea who's with me, what's going on. I'm just in the film."
Are you the same way with music or theater or anything else, or is film a unique experience for you?
I think films generally neat that way, but I think it happens. Yeah, I can get really lost in music. Theater, somewhat, not as much. Maybe it's not as immersive, or I get distracted by the other people in the audience. That's the other thing. I don't, even though my mom owns a single screen theater, one of the oldest ones in the country. Like I hate watching movies with other people. I just want them to shut up, especially like so. I like to focus in. So maybe that's why theater maybe is a little more difficult. And then books, I just get fully just zoned in and immersed in books. But I think like all of those things have a meditative quality to them, right? Like, I think meditation is generally overrated. But I think the other ways in life through exercise, through reading books, et cetera, or taking naps are other ways that we can relax and meditate, that we don't need to be so pretentious with our morning routines and our meditation practices.
I love that idea. And I think, I can't remember if I'm sourcing this from like a comedian or somewhere else, but it's just this idea of meditation as like, there's lots of ways to meditate that don't include you paying your subscription fee to Calm on your phone or something.
Yeah.
Like you can go for a walk. You can jump in a pool. I just did this interview with like two guys who are coaches, Sean Delaney and Mark McCartney. And they're both like Sean's like, I jump in the pool. Mark's like, I walk my dog, and like more or less has a conversation with this dog while he walks. And like these guys are trained professional coaches, and they're like, this is meditation. Like,
Well,
why don't more people know this?
Did you ever read The Rise of Superman? Kotler's book? Basically, the premise is like basically that the extreme sports athletes are pushing the forefront of like that mind-body connection more than anything else, and that meditative, the Csikszentmihalyi like flow state is like the people that are, heli skiing or, wingsuiting or whatever, they're the ones pushing flow state more than anybody else. And that's the most meditative, hardcore thing you can have is when you have that element of danger and death on your side. And so maybe that's part of it too, is like you said, in the pool or other places is like where you can get absorbed, where like, it's really hard. Our lives are all consuming, especially as entrepreneurs, and it's 24/7. So it's like, yeah, how do you find these ways where like you need something pretty extreme, maybe to have that pattern interrupt to like maybe get you out of that state. And then like you're saying, the other one though, and I think it makes it funny to me is like the idea of meditation, like you said, walking the dog or whatever is not as cool as, something that started in India, and has this whole yogic, Vedic kind of pathway to it. The other one is, the way I always say it is like, my sister went to Brown, and all those kids, at Brown understandably wanted to save the world. Yet they'd like kick the bum on the corner, as they walked by, because it wasn't cool, right? It was a local charity, not a global charity. And it's like, it's like it didn't have some nice patina to it, that looked more international.
I made a lot of enemies in college when they wanted to protest something for like employee rights. And the way they were going to protest was they were going to block all these roads. I was like, but if you block those roads at 8 o'clock in the morning, you're going to get all the people you're fighting for fired. Like none of them want this. I have to get to work. Those people, please don't block this.
I'm late for work. Get out of my way. Yeah. It's,
you're not helping the cause, people. All right. So take me back to you're hustling, you're making some money, you're figuring out, are you trying to figure out how to not work a crappy teenager job? Did you have a crappy teenager job?
I had so many. So one of my mom's other terrible philosophies was that if we work like hard physical labor, then we want to get an education. So I was going to be the first person in my family to graduate from college, but I never graduated. So that gives me that my parents like didn't really go to college. And so my mom's philosophy, was hard labor. So she was also a realtor at the time. So when she was trying to like close a house, people would be like, well, I love this house, but I'd really like a koi pond. And she'd be like, oh, no problem. My sons will come build it for you for free. And so we would start.
She'd promise you her time.
So we were like, digging koi ponds, trenches. The other high paid work when we were growing up was like building houses. So like I worked for electricians, crawling up in attics in the middle of summer to feed wires through, like in asbestos ridden, like insulation was always felt great at the end of the day. And then like at 13, I worked at a place called Echo Park that was a toboggan run. So it was just like ice sled trails, and the toboggans would go up and down. And from when I got off for freshman basketball, my buddy's dad owned it. That was in freshman. He'd pick us up, and we'd go work until like 2 a.m. Get up at like 5 a.m. Work till like 2 a.m. like every weekend for like $3.75 an hour. So I'm really dating myself. And then like after that, I worked like tons of fast food jobs. Circling back to Blockbuster, I eventually worked at Blockbuster as well. Like, so I was a fry cook at KFC. Taco Bell. Like, all of these things weren't long stints, by the way. This is part of my juvenile delinquent is like, this
6
sucks.
weeks at a clip, 2 pay cycles, and you're out.
Exactly. I can't do this anymore.
All right. So in the midst of doing like all this stuff, where's the religion and the philosophy interest? Like, when's that kick into high gear where you're like, this is a viable path to college? Or was soccer just a path to college?
Soccer was the path, actually. Unfortunately, like you're saying, like, we grew up watching these VHS tapes, right? Like, I'm so jealous of the kids now. It's like, one, not only do you get to watch soccer at the highest level anytime you want, right, on your phone if you want, is like you also had these paths of like, you can see how like Christian Pulisic like went to Dortmund as a 13-year-old, right? That like La Masia is where the Barcelona youth grow up. Like, there's these paths, right? Like, I didn't know that any of that existed, right? Like,
nobody cared about that. I was in Pennsylvania. Christian Pulisic in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Nobody. We knew Sesame Place was near him in Hershey Park. How the hell did he find that out?
Well, it helps that his dad's a professional indoor soccer player too, right? Like it all comes out of there. So, speaking of movies, I love Dead Poets Society. So I thought
I got a no Captain My Captain reference.
You did.
It was perfect.
Idea.
This is great. Perfect. Okay.
And so I thought university was going to be like Dead Poets Society. Boy, was I disillusioned quickly. And so
should have gone to a preparatory boys high school.
Exactly.
You could have had that experience. Yeah.
So I always thought that soccer was a pathway to college, right? I would play soccer, I could get a scholarship, and then I'd go to college and I would have this unbelievably rigorous academic environment that I'd be, fully consumed by, all these sort of romantic notions I had at the time. So I used soccer to go to school. I was living I went to the IMG Academy in between. So I lived at the Sports Academy in Florida with all the professional tennis players. But like now it's totally different. I get so much credit for it now because that place is like a college campus and it's state of the art. But back then it was a piece of shit. Like it was like Piggy's got the
Florida
lunch. Yeah. It was like eight 16-year-old boys living in a 2-room like apartment, like going to school from 7 to 11 in the morning, training professionally for the rest of the day, and then just wrestling in the dorms at night, and just seeing like who's king of the hill, right? And so it was and you just smelled like burnt oranges from the Tropicana factory. It was a nightmare. Like if you've ever read Andre Agassi's Open biography, he describes it perfectly, and he was just a few years before me. And then now it's like this fancy place.
Okay.
So yeah, all the kids in my class were like professional tennis players. So I was like valedictorian in my class because I knew how to read. I mean, it wasn't really impressive. But then after that, I was going to go to UNC Charlotte because they had like the number 2 soccer team in the country. One of my teammates at IMG and buddies was going there. So I was going to go there. And then my other friend from IMG was going to College of Charleston. And he's like, don't go to UNC Charlotte. Like, come to College of Charleston. And I was like, how's the coach? He's like, I mean, it's a 6 girl to guy ratio. I was like, how's the coach? He's like, the architecture is amazing. I was like, how's it? So needless to say, I ended up going to College of Charleston. Loved it there. Absolutely loved architecture. Loved everything about the city. But the coach was like an ex-Marine that never played soccer. So him and I did not get along well.
Well, to the ex-Marines who, yeah.
Right. And then,
Yeah,
oh,
on the
I was just gonna say on your question though, like I originally when I went to school, I actually started as an international business major. And I found that to be unbelievably boring and easy, just given like background of a family of entrepreneurs, always having entrepreneurial stuff myself. And then so I switched to always what I really wanted to do, and I switched to comparative religions. So it was in college where I really switched. But like I said, from 13 to 18, I was just going to churches, synagogues, every denomination of Christianity, just reading and learning everything I could about religion in general.
So I have a weird, I don't want to say it's definitely not even a theory. It's more half-baked than even that. But there was something also going on, I think, culturally, especially like in the 90s. And I don't know if it was just our willingness to skip genres in music or in the blockbuster line on what we were going to watch that night. But that whole willingness to just be like, oh, I slept over this kid's house, so I guess I'm going to the synagogue this weekend, or I'm hanging out over here, so I guess I'm going to a Baptist church. Like there was, I also had a lot of exposure to a lot of different groups like this. It was really curious about them. Just like, oh, this is so weird that your family thinks this, but like, I'm so curious about it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like wrapped into your upbringing?
Yeah. Like you said, it's like you usually stay over and then you go to these places, or like you're trying to date this girl and like she goes to church on Sundays. So you're like, yeah, I'll go, whatever. You just fall into these things, right? Like, cause you're trying to get rides everywhere. And it also goes back to like what you're saying is like, when we were growing up, we were all playing all these sports. And then my brother and sister and I, as we advanced those ranks, like we're playing international, we're playing all over the place. My poor parents is like, we're just going with friends, like teammates, right? Like, so you're always in the car with somebody else, or, hanging out at somebody else's house. So yeah, you eat what they eat, you go to the, church or synagogue they go to, and you get the experience that way. But it's always fascinating to me. I always understand belief and curiosity. I'm just fascinated by like why people think the way they do or what they believe. And it goes back to like entrepreneurship, insatiable curiosity is like, to me, why I really love studying comparative religions is because it encompassed everything, right? It was history, philosophy, art, religion, wars, politics, all of that in the history of humanity is enraptured or under the umbrella of religion. And so you could kind of study anything under religion and try to learn about history and society. So it's probably more from a historical, psychological perspective that I wanted to learn more. I was just fascinated by the way people believed in things, and then there's competing beliefs, and how do you reconcile that in your own mind?
When do you first, and this is a timeline agnostic question, when do you first, in the same way, see religion is the common thread that ties all things together, as is money, like as is finance? When does that first happen where you're like, money is connected to everything too?
It probably had to been before that, right? Like I'm still trying
That's what it sounds like. That's why I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm still trying to reconcile in my mind if money doesn't mean anything or if it's the only thing that has meaning, right? And then as you're referencing is like we think about it as a religion. My friends and I would talk about it often. It's like, yeah, it's a way to just harness resources, right? It's a tool like for harnessing resources when you need them. But it has become the secular religion of our day, right? And maybe that's part of the Nietzschean ideal of God is dead, or maybe when we, landed on the moon, allegedly, just say that allegedly for that.
Thank you. The conspiracy theorists in the comments, they want me to say, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Like how much I remember reading about an Irish a priest that all the village people came up to him after we allegedly like landed on the moon, and they're like, what does this mean about heaven? And he had to answer a lot of questions like then. And like, so, it's interesting, like how we've shifted that way. And then you brought up even the word agnostic. I even always hated that word agnostic or atheist, because like you're defining yourself by God, but you're trying to say you're anti-God. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But like there was this Austrian movement called the logical positivists that got a lot of things wrong. But one of the things they talked about was called agnostic, IG. And they said, until you can put forth a logical argument about God, I won't even entertain the sentence or question. So they weren't like anti-God. They were like, you have to say something that makes sense to me before I'll even respond. And so the burden of proof was like on the interlocutor. And that's the way they always looked at it. But I think you're still putting gnosis or Gnosticism in there, which is God-centric.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's funny. And I don't know if I know that word or just the, no pun intended, spirit of the word. I'm thinking about like, you're of the age, we're both of the age where like we had enough exposure to Carl Sagan, but not necessarily directly. Did you become a Carl Sagan person at any point in life?
No, my dad was a huge Sagan, Asimov, all that stuff. I don't get into any of like the fantasy stuff at all, which to me, like reality has just a surprising amount of fantasy to it. Like, I mean, this whole thing is magical to me, so I don't need an extra layer of magic on top. I know this drives people nuts. Like even like Game of Thrones, I'm like, are there dragons in it? And they're like, no, but like, and I'm like, but are there? I just don't like any fantasy.
Well, that's so you know, and this is the plea for when I say Sagan, I mean like the science communicator Sagan.
Yeah.
Like this is one of the great things. He had this great story about the dragon in the garage, and it's basically like agnosticism as you define it. He's like, if somebody tells me they have a dragon in the garage, like the burden of proof is on the person telling me they have a dragon. Because he's like, there's lots of things they can say where they're like, oh, smoke comes out when I crack the door a little bit. Like there's lots of things you can say that point to that. But if you have a dragon in the garage, I really just need you to prove me that first before we can talk about anything else.
Exactly. Then you're really just waiting for the hate comments on this one, aren't you? Like we're just going down there. How many people could we offend on this show today?
Oh, trust me. I've seen some real gems of comments on some of the other ones where I'm just like, people are just out there wanting to be angry about stuff, but that's okay. I'm having a good time. So take me back now. So college, and you're playing soccer. Now you're playing for the Marine. Hey, on the bright side, he didn't read Extreme Ownership. He got there before that happens. Congratulations. Is that what fizzled like the ambitions on what else with soccer, or were you already of the mindset that like, I'm not going pro, so?
I got part of it. Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about pro. I really wish I would have, because like I played with some professional teams in Bolivia, and I got invited to play with professional teams in Scotland and stuff like that. So I really wish I would have went down that route. Like, and let me qualify this of like, I would have never been in like the Premiership or anything, but I probably could have played like Division 2 or 3 in some, I don't know, in Belgium or something, who knows, or Turkey or something like that. And it was weird because like I was, as a youth in America, I was probably one of the top like 100 players in the country, but never broke into the national team. And I had like most of my teammates played in the national team. I mean, my roommate when I was younger was Tim Howard, the goalkeeper for the national team. And so like I know all these guys like really well, and like but it's frustrating. And I always ask my sister that too. She was probably one of the top 20 to 50 gymnasts in the world, but never made the Olympic team. And it's like, it's unbelievably frustrating when you get to that level and know you're never going to crack through that top. And like that can be incredibly frustrating, is like to know you're there, but you're never going to be there. And like, so you know exactly where that ceiling is, where most people never get to a point to know exactly where that ceiling is. And so when I was playing at College of Charleston, I think in our first year, we kind of got in and out of the top 25. Even as freshmen, I played in maybe a few games my freshman, sophomore year. But like I got disillusioned by the coach, was not enjoying playing anymore. Also got disillusioned by university. Like I said, it wasn't like Dead Poet Society. And unfortunately, what I did is I took all of the, I don't even know if schools still work this way, all the 400 level and 300 level like religion courses first in my first 2 years. And then they
just like cleared the shelf on like the hardest classes. And they were like, I can't, guys.
Yeah. So I went back to do like the remedial, like the 100 level like ones. And I was just like, I was arguing with the teachers, and they're like, yeah, you're right, but I had to teach the lowest common denominator. And I was like, I'm out. And so I ended up, I quit school, quit playing soccer. I went and I was working in restaurants. So I met a Turkish gentleman owned the restaurant I was working in. So he was telling me all about Istanbul. So I went and sold Turkish rugs to American tourists in Istanbul for a while after I took off time from school. I eventually went back to school, and I tried going back home. In Michigan, we have a place called Kalamazoo College. That's one of the best like small liberal arts schools in the country. And so I thought I could test myself. That was much more like Dead Poets Society. But I felt like I was still bored. It still wasn't for me. Like I should have gone to like St. John's College and done like their reading program or something. That would probably been better for me. But I just find I'm much better autodidact. I'm much more self-driven, self-taught. I just like to learn on my own pace and speed. So
focus just on the Turkish rug selling for a second, and then we're going to get back to you as a frustrated, bored, 20-something at this point, figuring out the world. Not a lot of people go, I met this guy in a restaurant, and now I'm going to go hang out in Turkey for a while. I mean, I have the They Might Be Giants tape. I know that Istanbul is not Constantinople. Like, I have got this nailed down. I also know that I'm, a bag of groceries left upon a shelf and whatever other particle math. I'm trying to remember what else was on that tape. So as you piece this together, like what made this a good idea for you to go over there? How did he talk you into this? How did you get on the plane?
Well, so this is the other hard part about narratives, and like I have a hard time believing in free will either. So it's like just these like circuitous paths in life is like, I think it goes back to like, one, I can't believe my parents, right? Like when I was 15, I went and lived in Bolivia for a summer, like with a host family in like a third world country. And then I'm like 19 going to live in Istanbul. And like, this is at a time, just to get contextually, is like, it was either the first or second time I was living in Istanbul. I think it might have been the first. I signed up for a Hotmail account at a computer bar, right? Like it was like, internet cafe.
Internet bar, yeah.
And this was at a time like where you signed up for Hotmail, but maybe only a few hundred, like you're trying to get the network effects. Like that's just how early on it was. So like I would buy a calling card that was enormously expensive, be able to call my parents like once a month, and for like 90 seconds be like, I'm okay. Like it's just unreal. Like,
I'm alive.
Yeah.
This is not a terrorist.
Talk to you
Luckily,
next month.
Taken has not come out next. I'll talk to you in a month, probably.
So I can't believe they, one, let me do it. But two, I think it's because I come from a family that has pretty much wanderlust. Like that was the other part of my dad too, is like he was, like you said, did he take you to do these things? One of the things, like even when we went camping as kids, we used to beg my dad to bring a tent because he thought like tents were for pussies. So like we had to go with like dig a hole and like a sleeping bag. Like, I mean, it's just wild stuff. And so he had kind of traveled the world, hitchhiked across America, like done all this stuff. Like, and then on my dad's side of the family, my grandfather, my great grandfather had all like traveled the world. Like my great grandfather worked on like merchant ships and he didn't even know how to swim. And so I come from this long line of like lunatics. So the idea of traveling to these countries was not, this is why, one, why they let me go, because they were kind of used to it. But then two, it was like, yeah, I've always heard those stories growing up. And then that romanticism of movies and books, right? Like we didn't have the internet. So I wanted to go see for myself. And thankfully, for all the things that have changed for our generation and our time growing up, is like, well, that's one of the things I'm so glad we got to experience, was like traveling the world pre-internet was a totally different place.
Totally.
Where now you have like the Californication or the Airbnb-ification of the world. Like, right, like now we could go to Bangkok and watch the Premiership on a 70-inch flat screen TV, right? And yeah, it has a little bit slightly different background, but you're probably getting an acai bowl in the morning, and a matcha latte. Like it's all kind of like, unfortunately, the same. So like, I'm so glad I got to experience it then, but it was just more of like growing up in rural Michigan, I really wanted to get out. But luckily, like, when we would go on the vacations, like, my dad was doing business in China in the 80s and stuff like that. So it was like, our family is kind of accustomed to travel, and like his best friend lived in Colombia and stuff like that. So we got associated with travel a lot. And so the other part of it was, after that, I was working in restaurants. And so I would just save up as much money as I could working in restaurants, then go travel in Europe until, 6 months, a year, until I ran out of money, come back to Charleston, work in restaurants, and just kind of like lived a lot of that life.
So talk to me about like the restaurant jobs and stuff like that. Do you get fully just indoctrinated because you were the fry cook at KFC and whatever else, that you're just like, this is another viable couple of paychecks I can pick up?
No, it's a simple money and freedom. Is like, I've done everything in restaurants from dishwasher to owner at this point. But back then in, let's see, it would have been late 90s, early 2000s. Like I was making, anywhere from $100 to $300 a night, working in restaurants, like waiting tables. And going back, my buddies were building houses in Michigan in the freezing cold of winter for like, I don't know, $6, $7, $8 an hour. Like this was just magic to me. Like I started probably making more than my parents as like a 20-year-old waiting tables in Charleston. Like it was just totally magical at that time. Now the problem is, everybody knows that if you get deep in the restaurant business, is at the end of the shift, all the servers are then so burnt out from like the pressure of waiting on tables all night that they all go to the bar after and then drink away half their tips. And so it's really hard to save money that way. So,
but the bar industry stays afloat. It's a stimulus package for the bar industry.
I'm like, why are we doing, like, I tried for a while, like I would go on runs at like midnight when I got off shifts, because you just have all this pent up energy from like the palpable nature of like waiting tables and the risk of it all and trying to provide good service. But like, you can't, it's really easy to kind of fall into alcoholism. And Charleston's one of those cities that's just a heavy drinking town. So it's very, very, very normalized. Like it wasn't anywhere, different than that. But like so that it was more about the love of the cash and the freedom of that, and being able to kind of dip in and dip out and go and travel and do things. But otherwise, I'm extremely introverted. People are always surprised by this, but like that was one of the reasons I kind of forced myself to sell rugs on the street of Istanbul, is because like it forced me to be more extroverted. Waiting tables forced me more extroverted, but I hated like every second of it. I'd rather, that's why actually liked working, behind the scenes. I much prefer being a cook or a dishwasher or a back waiter where I really don't have to talk to the tables.
What do you think about it? Like, how do you reconcile this? So you're not in a setting like this, you're not going to come across as an introvert to somebody.
Right.
And I think this is important, like extra, and all the praise to like Susan Cain, and I don't know how much of her stuff you've read or whatever, but
Yep.
like there's actual valuable nuance in this. How do you understand your flavor of introversion? How do you think of it or explain it?
Well, what Susan popularized is the idea is like, how do you restore your energy, right? Do you do it around other people or alone? And for me, it's 100% alone. Like, it's just, I prefer to be alone almost all the time. And like you said, it's really weird being in this business. You're like, luckily when I started doing a lot of interviews and everything, it was right after the pandemic. And so like in this scenario, right, it's just like you and I talking to each other and we forget there's an audience out there. Or when I'm
Right.
speaking on stage, it's actually really easy too, because it's just one to many. It's the one-on-one conversations where especially you have to come up with the small talk about like the weather or like whatever. I just couldn't care less. And I'm just like, let's talk about something real. Like, like, so those are the hard parts for me. But like generally, yeah, I have a really small circle. I spend most of my time alone. I try to spend deep amount of times just by myself, like talking to no one.
Do you feel like, and how aware of you that are you that with this, because of this is how you are with like the other people you work with? So that's current day, just for a second. When you think about the other people you work with, are you gauging or measuring how introverted or extroverted, where that energy, where that recharge comes from with the people you surround yourself with?
Yeah, I try to do a lot, but we also, we've always been a distributed company too. And so that comes with a whole other set of challenges where you almost have to like over communicate in a way, especially if like, all your meetings are over Zoom, like our employees are all over the world. And so, you have to over communicate that way. You try to really learn people's different styles of communications, in not just extroversion, introversion, written forms, emojis, like it takes a long time to kind of figure that out, to try to, get those right buttons. And then what's shocking, like you're saying, is like, I'm technically like the face of our firm. And so, but I'm extremely introverted. And so that presents its own dilemmas. But I think it's like every entrepreneur, it's like, it's punctuated extroversion because like to bring your ideas from your head into reality takes a tremendous amount of energy, right? To me, like you're animating this 3D hologram. And to do that though, you have to get other people to buy in. So you're going to have to talk to people. But the other book that I think helped me a long time ago when I was in maybe my early 20s was called The Hypomaniac's Edge. And the idea in that book is that every entrepreneur or explorer, anybody that does anything interesting has a mild form of bipolar, right? To do anything that requires that tremendous amount of energy to push these ideas from your head out into the real world and instantiate them requires a tremendous amount of energy that's going to have a commensurate downside. So that's why I know, like, if I'm out there at like all these events I have to go to and everything, I know I'm going to have to bifurcate that with a lot of downtime afterwards, right? I had to block off my schedule. Like, so it's like, I wish I could figure out how to run at a more marathon pace, but it's more sprint walk for me in general, or sprint lay down, maybe like,
Sprint nap. That's the way to do this.
Nap, yeah.
And I see this as related, and maybe I'm trying to like put a grand theory of everything on this, but I see this as related. Like this ties back to becoming a athlete up to a certain level and understanding the recharge, and then working in a restaurant and understanding like maybe a run after the shift, because all the things that happen in the restaurant on industry night are not the thing that I need at midnight in my life. I'm going to do things the next day. Understanding that like if I go on stage or I go travel, I'm actually going to need some serious downtime afterwards because I just need to be in a dark room away from anyone with my Criterion collection. Like that's a lot of variations on that theme that you're actually dancing through pretty well. Aware of that?
I wish I could find secular versions of a lot of these things, but I was gonna say from your lips to God's ears. But like, it sounds great. Like what I'm saying about this narrative in hindsight. I need to do such a good way of like syncretizing this and tying it up in a nice bow. But like, I remember even like my brother-in-law that lives in Miami. He's like Ivy League educated surgeon. He's like, there's not a lot of like smart people to hang out and have conversations with in Miami and everything. I go, what are you talking about? I was like, that's what books are for. Like, I don't expect it in real life. Like, just like,
have you met humanity?
Yeah.
Did you grow up in the house I grew up in?
Yeah. No, you
Like, have you not met these friends?
You could talk to the eminent dead and the great, philosophers of our throughout human history. The other way, I think to me, what it ties in, I was starting to really work on this idea with our Mutual Friends podcast on Value After Hours. And I had this idea, it was like, studying comparative religions. What you're studying is like, I studied all the world's like classical Abrahamic kind of traditions that, they kind of all stem out of there. But then I specialize in like Eastern mysticism. And so you can kind of break it down as like, you have more of the, physical instantiated place religions through the Abrahamic tradition, or you have, one person going their own way in more of the shamanic tradition. But they all kind of come out of the similar lineages as well. And they both have like similarities. But what I found is like, we use this word agnostic or atheist is like, this is why I think that religion hopefully helps me, or it's the way I lie to myself and tell me it helps me by studying this stuff comparatively kind of cross religions, is when you're constructing portfolios of different asset classes, right? I find myself to be, I say it's agnosticism, right? There's like, even though I don't like that word, is like everybody has these religions when it comes to investing, right? Like the value religion, the momentum religion. Everybody's got these religions and they never cross over. But if you're trying to truly build a diversified portfolio of different asset classes that, Zig when the other Zag, et cetera, is like, you have to be able to put those religions aside and combine things that can work at different times and different time horizons in ways that people will normally never do.
It's amazing because it's like the tied together skill of being like, I really want to date that girl, but I guess her dad's the, local pastor or whatever. So I'm going to find a new denomination this weekend. We'll see what happens. These learned skills. All right. So take me back to, you're working in kitchens, you're doing that stuff. How's the real estate stuff start to happen for you?
Well, first of all, so one thing I hate about when people tell like their narratives, like we were saying about, we skip over, we always hit the highlights, right? Is that after quitting school several times, quitting the soccer team, kind of traveling out the world, I find myself in like my early 20s waiting tables, and I'm looking around and obviously no disrespect to anybody that works in the restaurant industry, but like you could see like 2 decades could pass by like a blink of the eye and I'd still be waiting tables. And I was just like, and then now I don't have an education. I don't have any skill sets. Like, and those what I'm saying, people skip over all these tough times. And I just want to highlight for anybody that's going through it. It's really tough. Like you're those early to mid 20s when you realize, I don't really have an education. I don't really have a skill set. Like, what am I going to do with my life? And I have no clue what I'm going to do. Like those are extremely painful years and you don't know what you're going to do. And so eventually I kind of got off my ass and realized, like I said, my mom was a realtor at the time, like growing up, she flipped houses and everything. So I was always fascinated more by design and architecture. So living in Charleston was amazing because on that peninsula, they have over 800 antebellum homes, pre-Civil War homes. And I was fascinated by that architecture and design work. And so I just started, luckily I was born with a good memory. I just started kind of memorizing the MLS and every kind of house on the peninsula and like the price points and everything. I just started going through the list, and over time, because I love walking, that's my favorite pastime is just walking. So I just walked the city endlessly and I'd look at the houses and I'd look up how much they cost eventually. And I just kind of created my own kind of memory palace of what the city and the price point should be. So I started off originally just kind of doing some residential kind of realtor work, which I absolutely hated. Like I remember showing, like it was like the third time, showing somebody a house, and the wife was like, I don't like that couch. And I was like, it's not your fucking couch. Like you're going to move in.
You're not buying the couch.
Right.
You're buying the house. What are you failing to connect here? And the couch religion is a strong one. It's really hard to break people on that one. Yeah.
But I mean, and now I understand what she's really saying. Like she doesn't give you a good vibe from that house. It really doesn't have anything to do with the couch. But at the time, that blew my mind. I was like, this is not for me. Yeah. And then so I got to know this couple that was developing some of the best condos in Charleston at the time. And so he was a commercial real estate developer. And I just told him, I was like, look, you're having mobility issues. What if I like drive you to work every morning and drive you home? And so I just started getting in with him there. And so in the car, I could pick his brain about how do you do this? How do you finance this? How do you do it? Like then, and so it just came like through osmosis and just asking a lot of questions. And unfortunately, anybody's learned, like, you do not want me to go, hey, can I pick your brain? Because I will just excavate your brain with a, bulldozer. Like I will just go deep and just keep asking you questions till you're exhausted. And so I just learned kind of through asking those questions and then doing it myself, just started to buy properties, fix them up. And I just got really lucky at the time. Charleston, when I first moved to Charleston, it didn't have a single national chain store on King Street, which now King Street's one of the best commercial districts in the world, like has Apple stores, everything. And so it was like kind of since one of the last hurricanes, the buildings, those beautiful historic buildings on King Street, the retail would be occupied, but second, third, and fourth floors were empty. And so they're selling on cap rates just based on that retail floor. So I could get ideas from like New York, San Francisco, London, and go, hey, I wonder if we did this in Charleston because we're just 10 years behind. It's a way to kind of catch up. So I would just work on really developing those second, third, and fourth floors into either, hotels, condos, apartments, that sort of thing. And then at one point, like I said, I owned restaurants. And so sometimes they'd give me a free call option on putting the restaurant in the ground floor. And then if the restaurant fails, which they eventually do, now I can release that for maybe triple the price. And it was part of my upfit costs. So you could get kind of a free call option on restaurants if you own the building. So that's what I recommend for everybody, because that was one of the, I say mentors. I never really had any mentors in my life, but I knew a guy that had over time owned 16 restaurants in Charleston, all of which were subsequently no longer in business, but he had bought every building that his restaurant was in. And now he was worth like $60 million back in like the early 2000s. So I learned from him, you want to own the building, whatever it takes, own that building.
It's one of those funny things in the whatever, like the first real Anthony Bourdain book that's one of the recurring things. I reread that earlier this year, and it's just every restaurant and like lesson ends with like, oh, but they didn't own the building, or like they should have owned the building, or this guy's only here because he owns the building. And it's always just like a sentence, but it's that most important business sense sentence in any of these insane stories that he's telling comes back to, do they own the real estate?
Yeah, because I was trying to explain to my brother, like, I think Taleb talked about it as like, we should have like National Restaurateurs Day, right? Like, because like if you go to like in New York City, you have tens of thousands of restaurants, tens of thousands are going to be out of business next year, but we all reap the benefits of having all this diverse cuisine and things to try at all times and get our fingers on it any chance we get. So it's a terrible business to be in. And like I was telling my brother about, I was like, yeah, you can raise, $500,000, $2 million to build out a restaurant, but you have to be realistic. It's most likely to fail. But if you own the building, now you have an asset, right? And you may have to raise a couple $1 million to buy the building, but now you have a physical asset with a title and a deed. And so investors are much more likely to invest in that. And it's just having a fiduciary responsibility to your investors is like, look, my restaurant will go out of business. When it does, hopefully the city's increased in value over the last 5 years. And now I can release that for 2 to 3 times the rent. And now that building's that much more valuable. So it's just a way of hedging that risk of being a restaurateur.
Do you feel like you intuitively grasped that, or did you build this intuitive understanding of this basically like this call option of having this asset that you're doing this? I think it's a very option aware framework that you're imposing on this. And I want to know how much you knew it then.
I think about most of my life, I think entrepreneurs, right? It's the misnomer that entrepreneurs are risk takers, right? We're risk mitigators. You mitigate the risk so much until then you have to take the leap, right? And that's what I think. The creativity in entrepreneurship comes from risk mitigation. And I always think intuitively, I always had a good sense of arbitrages and optionality. And it was getting a better sense of that. But I also want to reiterate though, this is me telling my own narrative, but let's be honest, like as a commercial real estate developer, I blew up in the great financial crisis. So there's a lot of things I did wrong too, like as taking on too much leverage and not cash flow, time horizons. There's a lot of things I did wrong. But I think intuitively, entrepreneurs that mitigate risk, we're essentially always trying to find an arbitrage or some sort of, call option on anything we're doing. And that's the beautiful creativity you get from entrepreneurship. Like I even think about like, I used to even, middle soccer bets using, UK bookies and everything, like, cause you could guarantee an arbitrage, right? Like if you could find those different pricings on that, or like I used to count cards in baccarat, right? That's an arbitrage. I like risk-free money. I don't really like taking risks. Like it makes me feel bad. It hurts, I don't like being up at night, but like, unfortunately, lack of free will. This is the unfortunate roller coaster I'm on that I just beat myself in the head every day through entrepreneurship and trying to suck less.
Talk about the failure. And this is funny too, I've heard you say this before. People in real estate say the market topped at a different point than people in stock markets. Say what that is.
Yeah.
And just say this.
For the GFC, for the Great Financial Crisis, everybody goes 2008. That's for the financial markets. It was 2007 for real estate. So all the signs were there. But like, I remember in like 2006, I kind of saw the writing on the wall, right? I noticed it was getting harder for the people that buying the condos of like buildings I was renovating to get mortgages. And so I kind of saw who were like, back then it was, your Countrywides, your Washmu, like all those people that were writing like those like ridiculous loans. Like, so I saw who the worst kind of actors were. But I remember I got together with like 6 of the other real estate developers in the Charleston area, all of them over the age of 50 or 60 at the time. And I was only like in my mid 20s. And I said, guys, I'm seeing like cracks here. It's making me nervous, but I don't have contacts, right? And to a man, they said, no, this time's different. You're fine. So in hindsight, right, I had to learn that commercial real estate guys are preternaturally optimists, right? And all they do is declare bankruptcy and start over, right? I didn't understand that at the time. But once again, any of it's all my fault, right? And the thing is that I had to learn the hard way is everybody thinks it was about leverage in real estate, which is why everybody loves real estate, because you can leverage it more than most other things individuals can invest in. But to me, it's more time horizons, right? And so it's more about time horizons and volatility. And what I mean by that is like, whenever you're projecting a project out 1, 2, 5 years in the future, you need the future to look like the present, or you need it to be as low volatile as possible, right? If you're creating your projections, your P&L, your pro forma, you need the future to look like the present, or you need the volatility to be lower over time. And if during that time volatility picks up or credit dries up globally, well, you're absolutely screwed. It didn't matter what your projections were. So that's part of the leverage time horizon combo that you need with a lot of these more granular private assets, whether it's PE, private credit, venture capital, real estate. Those are the things you got to worry about more is your time horizon and what's the global macro volatility or liquidity cycle look like. And so the pain of losing that money, that's one of the things I don't want to gloss over, is I was, for not knowing, because I don't go to like psychologists, I was probably deeply depressed for years after that. And because it's one thing to like lose your money and your own money and everything, but when you lose family and friends' money, and it's not their money, it's the belief in you, right? And so the things I've had to learn throughout life too is like, so I go to college, right? And I'm playing on a D1 soccer team. I'm an international business major. All the family and friends like, oh, you're crushing it. You're doing great, right? I switched my major to comparative religions. They're like, what kind of loser are you, right? I quit the soccer team. They're like, loser. Quit school, loser. Like moved to Istanbul, like all this stuff, just loser, right? Then real estate comes along. I'm starting to develop those properties. I build up to a multi-million-dollar net worth statement in my early to mid 20s, which net worth is meaningless, kids. Now I'm a genius again, right? And then the crash comes. I lose everything. Now I'm a moron again. Like I'm the devil incarnate. So it's just like you learn through these cycles too, is like people's perceptions of you versus who you really are, or even if you could find out who you really are, it's just like they fluctuate based on like this religion that you brought up before of money. Like this is why I can't stand this industry we're in, these podcasts we're in. It's like, it's this Gell-Mann amnesia, this Dunning-Kruger effect, where we think that like, just because somebody has money, that they know about everything and then they're omniscient. No, these people got lucky. They were very domain specific, and now they don't know anything about anything else. Yet we give this imprint on them that like they're cross-sectional genius and everything they say is gold. No, they're saying moronic things, but yet because they have $1 billion, you believe anything they say.
And funny the amount of perceived wisdom a bunch of comments after your name grants to you. Exactly. Never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah, you take away that billionaire status, all of a sudden you'd be like, what the hell is this person talking about? But like, no, you swallow everything they say. And that's why, like you're saying, like it's the religion of our secular society. It's got to be money, right? Those are our priests, our potents that like, they hand down the clay tablets from above and tell us how to live our lives. And it's like in a more interesting way to me, at least, is like, nature, as we know, like doesn't create any copies when it creates humans. Yet all of human society is about creating copies, right? Like be like these other people, be like Jesus, be like Druckenmiller, like be like these people. Like we're just trying to create all these copies. And like, to me, like man's at war with himself in a sense that like we're total wild animals, yet this society is trying to comport us into this like polite culture and to be like everybody else. And so like, we're always like kind of fighting that battle internally. And it's interesting to me that like, yeah, you should be like Ray Dalio. Like, why? Why would I want to be, or Warren Buffett? Like, why? I don't see the point.
There's that weird thing. I actually think about this maybe way too much, where it kind of goes back to like, be acceptable or be aware of the worst shit. Like, yeah. Be aware of this idea. It's like being like Jesus, whatever your religious beliefs may be, is like being a good guy who's like okay with doing some stuff. Have your occasional glass of wine if you want it, whatever. But like, that's a lot more noble path in many cases than be something that's impossible or unreachable. I was talking with another person who's like I think she's first generation American and financial planner. And she was like, stop it with the Buffett narratives. Like, not starting an insurance company. Don't talk about investing your float or whatever. Like, nope, it's not the way it works. Like, you run the Asian grocery in town. Like, I'm going to help you out figuring out what this thing is. Those stories are harder to tell.
But it always fascinates me because I love I have so many friends that are like Buffett acolytes, or Munger. And it's just
yeah.
I don't get it.
Great religion. It's a great religion.
Like I said, it's a great religion. It's just like, you want like, and then somebody else said like, if you want to admire this person and be like this person, you have to take their whole life And so that means like Buffett, are you stepping over your kids, when they have a broken arm, how's that polyamory situation? Like people forget all these other things. Like, oh no, he's just got this nice old house in Omaha. I'm like, did you forget about his house in Laguna Beach that he's trying to sell for $14 million? Like there's a lot of little things that don't quite add up to this cuddly grandpa. But I tend to get in trouble whenever I talk about Buffett and Munger, but it's just like, I never understood as a grown man to have so much adulation for another grown man. It's just like sports, like traditional sports. Like, am I going to look up to a 20-year-old that can throw a football? Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Awe is a very dangerous thing. And you have to, and I wonder if that comes back to some of the other stuff too. Like you have to brush with that. You have to stumble into it to be like, oh, it's just a regular guy. Like, or just a regular lady, like just a regular human. Like there's nothing special about them. They've achieved something special. That specialness is not, it shouldn't change the way I go about the rest of my life or think it's repeatable in many cases.
And unfortunately for me, if I'm honest, it's also probably extreme arrogance because we were talking about childhood. I do remember as a kid, like meeting like professional hockey players and everything. And I was like, I don't care about them. I'm trying to be the first Jason Buck, like, so it's like that extreme arrogance. And like, I just want to feel like Wayne Gretzky. I'm trying to be the first Jason Buck. And then the other one is making me think about that. You do remind me a lot of is like Stephen Colbert. I know that's the highest form of compliment for you, but like he did. No,
I'll take it. Huge fan of the Colbert Report. Yeah. I have America, and so can you back there on the shelf. Fantastic.
He's the best. But I was thinking about two things on that. One is like, I had friends that have like been on the show, and they tell them like, when you're going, don't try to don't try to like to play with him. Like, don't try to be as funny as him. Like everybody tries, and you're not even close. You're not as quick witted. Like it's not going to happen. Right. Like, and I know on this, like, I'm not going to spar with you. So like that's part of it. And then the other one was like, I remember this one. He had a skit called. He wrote a children's book, and the children's book was called "Fuck It, We're All Gonna Die," and like that's kind of the way I view life. Like what are we talking about?
That's a great thing. Die. He has a thing. I'm pretty sure I cite this way too much in casual conversation. I need to actually pull that book off the shelf and find it. But it was basically like, if you want to raise your kids to be like good adults, you have to raise them religious, and you have to raise them in like the Abrahamic, like you want that religion type specifically, because you want them to be raised with a God character that's even bigger than the parents, who is totally arbitrary in the rules. Like you need to beat that into their heads that no matter what, arbitrary forces abound, and that's all you're going to have to go on. So just like find your north, keep walking. It's going to be a mess.
Well, and that's what's beautiful about or interesting about the Abrahamic traditions is like what they call like the full pleroma of how they get you, right? If you think about, you have a developing mind and you're walking into like these Catholic churches, right? And they have like stained glass windows, they have incense, they have music, they have like they're hitting you from every sense you can as a developing mind. Yeah, and it's just like indoctrinating you. So it's almost like, especially Catholics, I feel like they can, even though they try to go agnostic or atheist, it never works out. Like they can never do it. They're just fully indoctrinated. Like they're always going to have that seed of doubt that always gets them. But also like when you're saying, how do you raise good kids? Like I was just having this conversation in the car the other day with my fiance. We talk about it all the time. It's like, I have a bunch of friends that are like stand-up comedians and everything. And it's like, they're very cognizant of it in the stand-up comedian world that like their messed up childhoods are what creates great comedians. And like, their kids, if they make it as comedians and they're wealthy, like their kids are going to have plush childhoods. So they're not going to be comedians. Right. And like, that's what I was saying, like entrepreneurship's a bug, not a feature. Like the arrogance of thinking I could be the first Jason Buck, like all of that is a broken brain character. That comes from a broken childhood that you desire so badly to achieve such great things in the world. So like you were saying is like, not only do we look at these heroes that made money and go, that's just a regular person. I look at those rooms and go, these are broken people. Like, especially when I'm at like hedge fund conferences and everything, I just look out across the room. I'm like, all I see is just people riddled with insecurities and childhood trauma.
Yeah. How broken were you to fill whatever gap that you're filling in your life, be it financial or be it just like, please everyone just get along in this room. The ancient comedian story of like, just no one hit me. What do I need to do to control this?
Attack first.
Yeah. Attack first. Yeah, we won't get into the metaphysiology of 106 in Park and the freestyle rap competitions. That's a whole other conversation for another day. Yeah, Jin had the great like, I will do personal attack at a level of things you can't even say. Things you can't even say. I will insult myself to just take every card off the table, and I will win by savagely destroying myself first. So the business then. And we're going to go to notes after this. This is a perfect, like, I feel like end point for us to recap after this. But all this experience is to say the financial crisis happens, all this devastation for you to go, I am not exactly going to do that again. You didn't want to lose the entrepreneurial itch. Like that was the thing that made you you. You said, I am actually going to start a business to try to say, how can I do this, but not blow the assets that I save along the way? Is that a fair way to say it? Or how do you tell this story?
Yeah, the pain was so great of it that I never want to experience that again. And so I looked at it from two perspectives. Is one, I had that generational experience with my father's side of the family of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. My father was the third generation. And so I was obsessed from a young age with like multi-generational wealth, or, how do you get wealthy? How do you stay wealthy? Like I was obsessed with, like Worth magazine when I was like 17 years old, like all those kind of things. Like
that's healthy.
Just a weird kid. Yeah. It was just a weird kid.
Yeah.
So I was obsessed with that. It's like, how do you stay wealthy? And so part of that is now I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and I say, look, you had to take unbelievably concentrated risk to get wealthy, and you got very lucky. That's hard for them to handle that. But like now to keep it, you have to do a 180 and you have to diversify broadly to be able to keep that wealth. And for a lot of people, that mental shift, that true 180 is very hard to handle. So that was one perspective I had, is like, how do you maintain wealth or build wealth over the long run? But then how do I know if as an entrepreneur, I'm going to mitigate risk, but then take risk, right? And it's very offensive when you want to take that risk. So what I was saying earlier is about the time horizons is like, how do you hedge that global macro liquidity risk, right? Like, we can't be global macro traders, right? We have to be very deep in our idiosyncratic risk in our business and not really pay attention to the global macro scenario. So coming out of the great financial crisis, obviously was a huge fan of Taleb and like Black Swans and everything, made a lot of sense to me. And so I had taught myself over the years or decades how to like trade futures, options, all those sorts of things. And so for me, it was like, okay, how do I hedge my entrepreneurial risk? And so I can hedge that entrepreneurial risk with tail risk liquidity, because when global liquidity dries up, it manifests in the S&P 500. So I can have that put option like insurance. And then things like inflations or protracted recessions, it's like commodity trend followers tend to do well. And I've been studying them since I was like a teenager too, going back to like a Market Wizard books. So I was like, okay, how do I put this kind of stuff together? And the idea there is like, most people, when they look at their portfolio, they get a pie chart from their financial advisor and they go, look, you're broadly diversified. And I go, look, you're 100% in offensive assets. When correlations go to 1, those are all going down together. Doesn't matter what diversification you think you have, it's conditional. And so we try to focus on the defensive side. So we always say offense plus defense wins investing championships. And so we kind of put that together in a total portfolio solution with our cockroach strategy. But that's the idea, is it kind of muddles along kind of whatever global macro quadrant we're in, and you can sleep at night. And I built that as more of a portfolio to stay wealthy. But the way I view it is maybe a bit different, is I view it as like, whenever I want to embark on an entrepreneurial venture, like it's high risk no matter what, no matter how much you mitigate that risk. So I'm like, maybe if I can have this liquid portfolio that kind of hedges out my risks, and I can use some of this portable alpha of this cash I'm sitting on, well, maybe I use 10, 20% to take this entrepreneurial adventure. If it completely crashes out, well, I have this portfolio that's kind of chugging along and mitigating those risks. So to me, it was a way to like, knowing I can't help myself, I'm going to want to build businesses, but knowing the risk that's entailed with that is how can I mitigate that risk? Or it's almost like going back to like, if a restaurant's that risky, how do I de-risk it by buying the building, right? So if a business is risky, how do I de-risk it with maybe having this overarching liquid portfolio that can handle kind of anything that goes on in the global macro environment or in markets in general?
It's so interesting, and we're gonna go through notes here. We got notes to talk.
Oh man, I don't know how you do this in real time. I'm so impressed, by the way. I know it sounds like I'm patting you on the back after doing hundreds of podcasts myself and being on 100. Like I'm in awe of how you do this in real time.
Well, we're doing this in real time, and I think like this, and you hit upon it towards the end. So all my paper fumbling, I was like, where the hell did I just write this down? Mm-hmm. And it was almost at the end of what we were just talking about right before that, because you were talking about being risk mitigators and not risk takers. Yeah. And the way that, or one of the ways that I'll often try to explain this to people is, it's like, you want upside to thrive in whatever you're doing, but like downside's all about survival. Like it's not, like downside all the way to zero is not good. And if you never experienced that before, like we want to intervene and try to help you understand, like there's a lot of shades of gray between here and when you're actually like in the red and when it's over. And that punctuates also these levels of the story. So all the way back at the beginning, and the ultimate hedge my entrepreneurial risk is a liberal arts education, like the ultimate Is it the ultimate hedge, or is it the ultimate like all offense approach to life, like a true liberal arts education?
I mean, my knee jerk is it's the all natural navel gazing way of life. It's a way to overthink everything and draw all
And
these
never do
conclusions.
anything.
Yeah.
Ultimate analysis paralysis.
Yeah, maybe that's it. But no, I think it does help because you have to be highly creative in business to figure out what risks. Because like it's a Kierkegaardian problem, right? Like we're looking and trying to understand life through the rearview mirror, but we have to live moving forward through the windshield. And so to live moving forward through the windshield, you can't fight the last battle of risk. You have to think of what are the risks I'm not thinking of. And so the more broadly, to me, the more broadly you read, watch movies, interact with people, everything, like the more broad data set you have to putting together unique ideas. Like I don't think anybody has original ideas. I think we can put together ideas from disparate elements in unique ways. And so to me, it goes back to maybe Timothy Wilson wrote a book called like Understanding Adaptive Unconscious. And the idea was like, we have lack of free will, or maybe the only free will we have is to put things into our conscious that then our subconscious can work on. So, and once again, solipsism for me, it's just confirmation bias. I'm just trying to put as much content as I can kind of in my conscious so that my subconscious has more data to kind of work through to work create those connections and bricolage those things together.
That's beautiful. It's basically, this is my Paul's Boutique theory of like, where there isn't nothing new, but you can do really ridiculous things if you're willing to put the work into how you're going to assemble this. We talked about naming conventions. If Cockroach Portfolios and Mutiny didn't work out, if you wanted an acronym like CYA Capital, I mean, come on, you could have been with CYA Cap. It would have been awesome. I have to tell you too, from those wonderful VHS tapes. So I had this pair of shorts, and they were like somewhere between a neon green and like a forest green. One of those only could have happened in like the early 90s colors. And so they looked like Umbros. And you had the UM on the front and the BO on the back. But this was the thing about like the generic shorts of the era. They were just Umbos. So it perfectly captured, as you turned, like where the R should be was like on the side of the thigh. And so from the front or the back, they looked just like Umbro, but on the side. I remember realizing this like after wearing them for, multiple years or seasons or something, and just being like, oh my God, my parents got me Umbo.
That's a good mom there. Like I've always been unfortunately, always been in like fashion my whole life, but we always shopped at TJ Maxx, right? But I could put things together at TJ Maxx, like, and you get these off brands. Like your mom's like, well, it looked like the ones you wanted. Like it's just missing the R there. Like, what do you?
It's not the ones, Bob.
Which one shocked me the other day is my fiance got some new running shoes. They were Diodoras. I haven't
seen a Diodora.
They're making a comeback apparently in the running space.
I know who's getting a tracksuit for Christmas. That's amazing. I love this idea of your dad as the assistant to the regional manager, scuba diver. All this stuff about like you and your siblings getting exposed to this stuff is fantastic. Dad as the Buddhist hippie, mom as the capitalist Catholic. There's just so much inside of this that I think is just so fascinating to me, that inside of the house, there was a non-conflict way that they were playing with these ideas, demonstrating that you can coexist with this stuff and demonstrating that it wasn't the one true way.
Non-conflict is not my household at all.
So is it just like high conflict, but nobody dies, and that's the lesson? Thrive on the upside, survive on the downside. Well, nobody died, so I guess it was okay.
It was definitely a high conflict, high touch household. I'll say so.
High conflict, okay. That's a fair way to say it.
No, there were not recent arguments at dinner of Catholicism versus Buddhism. No. And unfortunately, like we said, the Josh Wolf, chips on shoulders, but chips in pockets. I think, going back to that religion is money thing, is like my parents yelling at each other more. My mom yelling at my dad at night, like late into the night, was never about like who loved each other more. It was always about money issues. And so I think that left an indelible impression on me of like how much this one weird, coinage thing could affect our lives in so many different ways.
Was that part of the impetus when you started like doing the bracelets, doing the mixtapes, doing the stuff like that? Was that part of the impetus to like control your own money so it was separate from the family finances?
Yeah, and it's because I just don't want anybody to control me too. It's just one of that freedom, right? That you can't tell me what to do. Like I got my own shekels over here. You can, right. Because I couldn't imagine like I would have been so unbearable. Like if I was able to grow up now with the internet and like I would have had an Amazon FBA business at like 13 years old. I would have been like one of those kids making like 10K a month and just telling my parents, just horrific things. And, like basically leaving home probably at like 13, 14. I'd be dead by 19. But like, I mean, it would have been a good time.
Jason Buck died after his e-bike sales business took a wrong turn somewhere in Istanbul. He almost made it to watch his Criterion collection. I want to just shout out you in the friendship bracelets business. I want to point out you were the original Taylor Swift. Take that straight to Reading, Pennsylvania next time you're in the area. Let them know. The meditative quality of activities, that's something that I think is fantastic that you brought up. Hard labor with your mom. Extra shout out too, just the hard labor approach, going to Florida, being a part of the IMG Academy and doing that stuff. Bonus shout out for the Piggy's Got the Conch reference that you dropped inside of that. That was incredible. Made me really happy. This belief in curiosity and asking why, that really stems from you when you make that switch. And extra highlighter on this. Running into the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, like experiencing the ceiling of greatness in a tangible way. Like you said, Tim Howard was your roommate. Like that thing where you're like, I'm not messing with this guy. I'm not messing with this guy at all. Like, what does that mean to like run into that again, like the 1% of the 1% of greatness where you're like, that's a ceiling and I respect it and I understand why I can't cross it. And in sport, it's such a profoundly relatable thing.
Well, I put it this way, you may know this, like Tim could also 360 dunk. Like I'm 5'9" and slow. Like I'm not like, I maximize my physical gifts. And what you find at that highest level, it's not even your ability creatively. It's your ability to work at high speed and mitigate mistakes. And that's what it was. Those guys just didn't make mistakes. And they could play, and then in each level, the speed got higher and higher. So I might have had some more creativity gifts, but I would make more mistakes. And that was unacceptable at the highest level. And I didn't even think about it until you said it. Yeah, like I got to live with some of the best in the world, like from a young age, like, and be a part of that. And then like now, it was related to the thing you said before is like asking why is like, I get it. I fortunately or unfortunately get in these rooms with some of the best hedge fund managers in the world. But for kids out there, they're just people. Ask them why 3 times like a 4-year-old and they usually crumble. And so that's the deep, dark secret of our industry is maybe why these guys don't want to talk about, non-finance things or whatever. Or, all the macro pontification, if you ask them why 3 times, it tends to fall apart.
It tends to fall apart. Much like my theory of making the Aladdin reference in the beginning probably falls apart because I don't think that took place in Turkey, but we're not going to let Disney come into the comments on that.
They'll take credit. Yeah, they'll all take credit.
It's
like Mullah Nasruddin. Okay. He came from every country over there. Like it's crazy. Everybody claim it.
It's fine. Everybody claim it. Private curiosities, the punctuated extroversion. I think this is another thing that people just like spend some time understanding this about yourself and then with others. I think about it a lot. I made this note to myself. I think it was when we were talking about like you've been everything from a dishwasher to owner and all the stories of the restaurant along the way. Understanding leverage in the entrepreneurial sense is not just financial leverage. A lot of it's understanding operational leverage, like the actual like jobs or the things you do, or that and organizational leverage, like the people that are involved. The combinations of those two things, like all of them, give leverage. They give you upside optionality. They give you downside exposure. But that just the combination of people. How do you think about the combination of people and organizations and just the way different combinatorial things can be explosively disastrous or surging to the upside?
I think it's one of the hardest things. Like I'm not a great operator, right? Like I'm good at like bringing an idea into reality and getting it from 0 to 1. I'm not a great operator necessarily 1 to 10. Luckily I have people in my life that are very helpful with that on our business sense. But the other thing that really bothers me about our business actually maybe you just made me think about it for the first time. That goes back to front of the house, back of the house for restaurants. I feel the same way about the hedge fund space. Is everybody in the front of the house, the portfolio manager, the CIO gets all the accolades, but it's the people in the back of the house, like working on the onboarding, on the compliance, everything. They get paid the least, but like the business does not function without it. Like it's actually very similar to restaurants where people are like a good home cook or they throw a good party and everybody's like, you should own a restaurant. And it's like, no, you shouldn't. It's the business of owning a restaurant. It's the hard part. And I find it's exactly the same in hedge fund spaces. Like everybody goes, you're a great trader or whatever, you should start a hedge fund. No, the business of running an investment management business is a true business. And that's very hard to do. And like you said, you need to get together these different personalities and you need that front and the back end of the house to work in synergies together. And the back of the house doesn't get the love that the front of the house does, even from remuneration or just accolades. And it's shocking to me. And like, we try to have a very, maybe I'm too egalitarian and this is my dirty hippie nature, is like all of that stuff. We try to do that in that sense. And we even have like all of our clients pay the same fees, no matter if you're the smallest client or the biggest client. Like we do all that, and we lose business because of that. And then I try to pay my back of house almost the same as the front of the house. Because I just think it creates a more synergistic work environment. And you have to realize, like, without that function, and this is the hard part I had to learn in life, without the people to do those detailed things on that daily basis, that's not in my personality type, there's no business without them. Like, it doesn't matter what you do, what money you raise, however you get out there on podcasts, none of that stuff matters.
It's so interesting. And there's any of Kim Scott's work, like Radical Candor, or any of those, like,
Yes.
There's like cultural stuff. She's got this great metaphor that's been with me since whenever that book came out, of just like, you have your Rock of Gibraltar people and then your rock star people. And you have to give them the same attention and the same types of things, and like helping them with their career path and whatever else. And she did this at Google or Apple or wherever it was at the time, years and years ago. But it was like, you got to put as much effort into the person who needs the career path and is going to run away unless you keep them on the career path that you need them to progress through to help you out, or the people who just need to like process the paperwork. We just have to be the physical body who answers the phone and has an empathetic relationship on the other side. And if you put yourself with all rock stars, you're going to fall apart as soon as that rocket ship takes off. And likewise, if you have all rocks at Gibraltar's, like, you're never going to have the business that takes off either.
Yeah, dude, that's the thing. You need the combination of both, and it's so hard. And the other way I think about it that I think has helped me cross that chasm a little bit is, like, entrepreneurs are going to be people that search out like equity like income. And most employees are going to be people that want bond like income, right? They want steady Eddie payments. And the hardest part is for the entrepreneur to talk to the equity, to talk to the bonds, right? Like, and they just can't understand that world. And so you have to figure out how to put yourself in their shoes and be as empathetic and sympathetic as possible to understand what motivates them. Because, like, I don't care if you call me the janitor of Mutiny Funds, could care less. But like, other people are going to care about titles, right? They're going to care about salaries. They're going to care about a lot of things that I don't care about. So you have to figure out like carrot, stick, and incentives from people that think very differently for you. And I wonder, part of it is like, maybe I was raised in this cauldron of like, owning and working and managing restaurants and commercial real estate development are two of the sketchiest, hardest people to manage. And you have to use every trick in the book of carrot and stick to make sure your project gets done on time, or people show up for work or don't steal from you. So maybe as part of that, like, that's how I had that punctuated extroversion of learning how to deal with people. It's just like, to get what I wanted done, you had to use every tool in the toolkit, especially in those industries that are just filled with, shady stories constantly.
What's the whole other source of creativity and the whole other source of problem solving? Because when you got to appeal to that many different religions in those industries, you got to understand a lot of different approaches to do it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So tell the people, if they want to learn more, if they want to see more of what you do, where's good places to find you, connect with you, follow with all the work you're doing on the internet?
Yeah, you can find us at mutinyfund.com. That's Mutiny Fund singular. And it's we have a bunch of great essays, a lot of podcasts, YouTube, everything out there. On X, Twitter, you can find me at Jason C. Buck. And then, on wonderful podcasts like this, I guess, from time to time.
Find podcasts like this. Jason Buck, you're truly everywhere, but mostly this one. You are truly an intentional investor, but you're a loser, baby. So go get crazy with that cheese whiz. You are the number one Jason Buck in my heart, forever and always. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Pat. It's been great.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're watching The Intentional Investor so more people can find our show. You can follow Matt directly at cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. For more great content at the intersection of investing and life, check out epsilontheory.com or at epsilontheory on Twitter.